one, once again, we're so grateful to you. And thank you, everyone, for coming this morning. Longfellow. I mean, I've actually had a couple of notes from you saying, why Longfellow? And I'm curious to see how the conversation is going to go. Why a question about Longfellow? I mean, nobody, when we do Yeats or Elizabeth Bishop or Robert Frost, nobody says, why are we doing Robert Frost this week? But why is there a question about Longfellow?
Well, I think it's almost because you asked us to go see a silent movie that's a drama, not a comedy, with kind of overacting and sort of melodramatic stuff. That might be a little bit slightly out of style.
Well, also, I was influenced by Poe's thinking, really nasty criticism of Longfellow, but I just read Wikipedia and to bring things up to date, and it said that Poe may have just been trying to advertise his own magazine. So who knows? But he was very critical of Longfellow.
Do you recall in what he was critical of? Why was he so critical?
I would have to find it on
Wikipedia. Oh, no. Don't worry about that. I wondered
okay.
if you could, if
it's
you
probably, what at least I sort of suspect is that he's very light, and as somebody said, he wrote for children. But certainly his works are moving. I thought there were things in The Fire of Driftwood that really caught my attention. So I can't say I agree.
The curse is being popular. I think the curse is having a number of poems that are that popular, and perhaps he knew how to create that popularity by, aiming for the lowest common denominator, larger emotional themes, the large narrative poems. But I remember being
you just
when I was
froze.
younger and just, I wouldn't read anything else. I didn't give it a fair chance because it seemed damned by a few of the popular numbers.
Yeah, Catherine?
And it seems to me we thought they were narrative without metaphor, and just they seemed easy. And they weren't so complicated. I mean, one could understand them, so they must be not good. I mean, poems should be beyond our imagination. We can.
That's true. I think for me, my resistance to Longfellow, and I certainly had it, had that resistance, had to do with the kind of very old-fashioned language. I mean, it was a kind of old-fashioned language even already when Longfellow was writing, and that poetically, I think of these incredibly monotonous rhythms. Longfellow thought he was imitating, Greek epics, writing in dactylic hexameter. This is the forest primeval, the murmuring pines and that. By the shores of Gitche Gumi, by the shining, that there was something kind of relentless and monotonous about about those rhythms. Certainly in his most popular poems. Listen, my children, and you shall hear the midnight ride of Paul Revere. And you just, I mean, for kind of sophisticated postmodern readers, that 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 relentless rhythm can be really sort of deadening. And I thought everything he wrote was like that. And then I started discovering uh, things that I didn't know he wrote. I didn't know he wrote, this is a while ago, I didn't know he wrote a translation of Dante. And it's wonderful. And then there are a handful of poems, and I think The Fire of Driftwood is really at the top of that list, in which the 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 writing is we would, well, there's still something old-fashioned about the writing, about the syntax, but that he's dealing with subjects that are really more complicated and more really more moving, more with more human understanding, or with the kind of human understanding that we want, that we are looking for in great poetry. Um, and um, and I will let me give credit to David Ferry, who was the poet who introduced me to this poem, The Fire of Driftwood. And David thought that this was really one of the great poems in the English language, and one of the great American poems, that when we go back, when we now look back to 19th century American writers, poets, we look back to Whitman and Emily Dickinson, and we kind of forget that that Longfellow was really capable of writing, not consistently, but writing an occasional poem that's really a great poem, by any standard. And I think this is one. Pat, were you going to say something? No. Okay. You're muted.
No, I was just going to say before that it's the rhyming and the meter that attracted me to come to this meeting.
Oh,
I wanted to know what are we gonna say about poetry that seems so distant from our
yeah.
style
Well,
of
it,
life.
I think it's still a challenge. I mean, you know, 100 years ago, more than 100 years ago, we kind of turned, poetry readers really turned against this kind of poem, this kind of language, the rhyme schemes, the not just traditional, but really kind of uh, old-fashioned rhythms. Um, Cami, I know you have to leave um, uh, in a little while, but I had a very interesting email from you, and about the Longfellow, and I wondered if you would mind sharing what you wrote to me.
Oh, absolutely. Reading this poem, I was really struck by the sense of the past and those that are missing, and the beautiful way, the subtle way it gets spoken about in this kind of natural, sitting in a farmhouse but looking out over this landscape. And it reminded me, and the rhythm of it too, the 4-beat lines with the very careful rhymes reminded me very strongly of In Memoriam, Tennyson's very long poem. I wrote my dissertation on Tennyson, so these lines are very much in my heart and mind. And I don't know if you'd mind, Lloyd, but I don't know if we're going to read this poem aloud, but I'd love to read it.
I will read it out loud. What if I read it first, and then
Good idea.
You could read the passage from Tennyson?
Great.
Do you know, when was that Tennyson? When was In Memoriam? Is that 1850s?
It was published in 1850. I could actually look up when Section 95 was written, but I don't have that in my memory.
So
But,
so the Longfellow was written before In Memoriam.
Yeah, gotcha.
Yes, well, In Memoriam, when was the Fire of Driftwood?
In the 1840s.
So Tennyson's poem, he couldn't have
yeah.
seen it, but parts of it were begun to be written in the late 1830s. I think the first one of it, one of the first sections of In Memoriam might have been in 1837. Or no, 1833. I'm sorry. It took 17 years for him to write In Memoriam. So some sections were from 1833, but Longfellow wouldn't have seen them.
He wouldn't have seen them.
I don't believe so. I think it was published in its entirety in 1850.
Okay, I mean, I don't stable like a horse. I mean, stable.
I was just going to send a quick message to everybody if they're doing something to just mute themselves and unmute themselves when they're ready to join us, if that's okay. And so I can hear you read the poem. I'm sorry, Lloyd.
Good. I think the copy of the poem you got indicated that it was that the setting was Marblehead. So on the north shore, near the ocean, in a farmhouse, close to the ocean, in Marblehead. The fire of driftwood. We sat within the farmhouse old, whose windows looking o'er the bay gave to the sea breeze damp and cold an easy entrance, night and day. Not far away, we saw the port, the strange, old-fashioned, silent town, the lighthouse, the dismantled fort, the wooden houses, quaint and brown. We sat and talked until the night, descending, filled the little room. Our faces faded from the sight. Our voices only broke the gloom. We spake of many a vanished scene, of what we once had thought and said, of what had been and might have been, and who was changed and who was dead. And all that fills the hearts of friends when first they feel with secret pain their lives thenceforth have separate ends and never can be one again. The first slight swerving of the heart, that words are powerless to express, and leave it still unsaid in part, or say it in too great excess. The very tones in which we spake had something strange, but I could but mark. The leaves of memory seemed to make a mournful rustling in the dark. Oft died the words upon our lips, as suddenly from out the fire built of the wreck of stranded ships, the flames would leap and then expire. And as their splendor flashed and failed, we thought of wrecks upon the main, of ships dismasted that were hailed and sent no answer back again. The windows rattling in their frames, the ocean roaring up the beach, the gusty blast, the bickering flames, all mingled vaguely in our speech until they made themselves a part of fancies floating through the brain, the long lost ventures of the heart that send no answers back again. O flame that glowed, O hearts that yearned, they were indeed too much akin. The driftwood fire without that burned, the thoughts that burned and glowed within. Cami?
Okay, so this is from In Memoriam, section 95. And just one thing to notice is that at a certain moment, the address changes from you to he. And also look at the flames that are not a fire, but candles. And also the leaves are there. It's a different setting, but I think you'll see, and rather than an ABAB rhyme scheme with 4 beats to the line, this is ABBA, the in memoriam stanza, a little self-contained box for each stanza. All right, so here it is. It's about the same length. By night, we lingered on the lawn, for underfoot the herb was dry, and genial warmth, and o'er the sky the silvery haze of summer drawn, and calm that let the tapers burn unwavering. Not a cricket chirred, the brook alone far off was heard, and on the board the fluttering urn. And bats went round in fragrant skies, and wheeled or lit the filmy shapes that haunt the dusk with ermine capes and woolly breasts and beaded eyes. While now we sang old songs that pealed from knoll to knoll, where couched at ease the white kine glimmered and the trees laid their dark arms about the field. But when those others, one by one, withdrew themselves from me and night, and in the house light after light went out, and I was all alone, a hunger seized my heart. I read of that glad year which once had been, in those fallen leaves which kept their green, the noble letters of the dead.
Oh God.
Strangely on the silence broke the silent speaking words, and strange was love's dumb cry, defying change to test his worth. And strangely spoke the faith, the vigor, bold to dwell on doubts that drive the coward back, and keen through wordy snares to track suggestion to her inmost cell. So, word by word and line by line, the dead man touched me from the past, and all at once it seemed at last the living soul was flashed on mine, and mine in this was wound and whirled about imperial heights of thought, and came on that which is, and caught the deep pulsations of the world, Aeonian music measuring out the steps of time, the shocks of chance, the blows of death. At length, my trance was canceled, stricken through with doubt. Vague words, but ah, how hard to frame in matter molded forms of speech, or even for intellect to reach through memory that which I became. Till now, the doubtful dusk revealed the knolls once more, where couched at ease the white kine glimmered, and the trees laid their dark arms about the field. And sucked from out the distant gloom, a breeze began to tremble o'er the large leaves of the sycamore and fluctuate all the still perfume, and gathering freshly or overhead, rocked the full foliaged elms and swung the heavy folded rose and flung the lilies to and fro and said, the dawn, and died away. And east and west, without a breath, mixed their dim lights like life and death to broaden into boundless day.
Thank you. Thank you. There's so many similar themes, themes of memory. I mean, I think maybe we tend to think of Tennyson and Longfellow, two really maybe the most popular poets in England and America, as similar, as a little moralistic, as a little impersonal, and yet in Memoriam, which is really an extremely personal poem about the loss of Tennyson's closest friend, and the Longfellow. I think this is one of the best poems ever written on the subject of the way even friends there's some disappointment and a growing lack of connection, and the sadness of the even friends going their separate ways. And they're both they're both very melancholy they're both very melancholy, something deeply melancholy, even tragic, just behind these two poems, and in a kind of similar setting, in which the interior life of the poet is somehow reflected in what is in the outside world at that moment. Does that sound right to you, Cami?
Yeah, there's something about the way the dark gathers round, that there's a little bit of light against the dark with the candles or the fire,
The flickering.
Some sparks lingering, but there's this idea of that light lingering and really going out. And I agree that there's deep melancholy, and there's also a very huge, in the Tennyson anyway, feeling of love, of the difficulty of loving someone who's dead.
Yeah, and that's
go ahead.
That's a little different in the Longfellow.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
In the Longfellow, in some way, it's more about falling out of love, and
yeah,
and the
the first slight swerving of the heart that words are powerless to express. It's so beautiful.
I think that's the great line in this poem. That it's but let's go back. Let's look at the poem from the beginning, okay? The The Fire of Driftwood. What do you think about that title?
I'd be very happy to have thought of that one. It has so many options, you know. Driftwood is you think of as being something kind of waterlogged initially and old and having had all the edges scrubbed off it. And I guess it burns beautifully when it's dried out. But they're a little bit opposition, these terms. I like that.
Yeah.
How the old things can really burn.
And I think right. And for us, driftwood, you know, seems like a kind of souvenir, you know, little things that you put on your mantelpiece, or there's something kind of picturesque about driftwood, and that in this poem, it's something quite different.
Lloyd, it had me thinking, because it's so surprising the way the driftwood maybe comes from the wreck of ships and then makes him think of the shipwrecks. And I was realizing how many really terrific shipwreck poems there are in this era, and trying to think how present or enormous or close that might be to their experience, and wondering what the parallel would be in ours. But you know, Whitman has great shipwreck poems, Dickinson has great shipwreck poem, and that feeling of ships going down that might have held, well, anyway, you know, just that's striking in the driftwood too. Or just to follow from your point, it's not just a souvenir, and that it's not just a tree falling into the water.
Exactly. Yeah. Denise, I know you have to leave soon, and I know this is a poem that you like especially. And do you want to say something about that before you take off? You're muted.
Thank you. Thank you. I think it's mostly been covered. The idea of the driftwood embodying the wrecked ships is one that I find unusual and deep, and that this experience of noting the moments in which friendship and closeness begin to peel away is a topic not often attended to, but is a very real part of human experience. And sometimes it's written about in retrospect, but to have that unpeeling, that separation expressed in the present moment as it's happening in front of this fire is just something that gives me shivers. So, you know, I understand, you know, that Longfellow wrote in an archaic way, even at his time, but and committed the great sin of popularity, but this poem really gets me. I put in the chat, there were a lot of magnificent paintings of shipwrecks in the 19th century, and certainly before and a bit after, but there's something about shipwrecks. I mean, even in this century, you know, the wreck of the Edmund Fitzgerald, that wonderful Gordon Lightfoot song, wasn't even a wooden ship, but there's something about shipwreck as a metaphor and experience that's a little removed from us, but which still grabs us in a primal way. And and the way Longfellow links the image of the shipwreck embodied in the driftwood to the emotional shipwrecks of human experience
Yeah.
is quite insightful and rather brilliant, I think. But
And very explicit in the poem. And Longfellow
yes, oh
really
yes,
makes that analogy very explicitly. And it's true. I mean, ships, I mean, we don't worry about airplane crashes, but we don't worry about shipwrecks so much. But shipping was in Longfellow's time, certainly in the 19th century, there was everything was done by ship, and it was dangerous.
I never thought about a shipwreck before. You pointed this out about paintings, but a shipwreck captures that unbearable poignance after a person has died, going through their things, and you'll find a note, next Thursday, call so-and-so. It's just how life is just aborted.
Yeah.
Unexpectedly. But it's in a shipwreck has a direction, a sort of vector in it, just built right into it. That
right.
The other thing is the experience of sailing on a ship, akin to the experience of flying on an airplane, is a time when you know you've left solid ground, you're not in control, there is no help coming. So if there's a fate that's going to befall you, you know you will suffer it. We forget we're going to die alone, but if you're on a ship, you realize, okay, here I am in this experience, and I hope everything's going to be fine, but if not, I die. And everybody on airplanes has at least one moment of being a poet because they think about their mortality for a second, and then they watch the movie and try not to think that.
Right. Oh, thank you. These chat comments look very interesting, and I can't. It's hard to take the time to read them. But let's look at the poem. The Fire of Driftwood. We sat within the farmhouse old, and then there in that first line is this 19th century syntax and it's kind of Latin syntax where anyone writing this poem today would say, we sat within the old farmhouse. But having the adjective come after the noun it's kind of announcing to the reader, or let me just put it as a question, isn't it announcing to the reader that, well, this is a poem. This is not exactly the way we talk. This is the way we write poetry, certainly in our time. It's okay to have this Latin syntax where the adjective comes after the noun. And the poem just starts that way. We might bridle a little bit at that old-fashioned syntax, but then let's see what happens. We sat within the farmhouse old, whose windows looking o'er the bay. So we're getting this, it's a pretty explicit setting, and gave to the sea breeze damp and cold. And then, the syntax is also it's old-fashioned, but it's also not a cliche. And the sea breeze, this isn't the sort of romantic sea breeze, isn't this picturesque, which we might expect, but it's actually uncomfortable and um, uh, and and something is kind of, at the very least, unsettled and possibly unpleasant, and gave to the sea breeze, damp and cold, an easy entrance night and day, so that dampness and the cold and the dampness are, they're not about to go away. We're very vulnerable to that. No one's moving. Uh, but something, uh, David, what can you tell us what you're putting in the chat?
Oh, yeah, that the breeze is damp and cold. It's uncomfortable for the speaker, but it is itself at ease. That there's this emotional disconnect between the speaker and the environment. You were talking earlier about how, romantic poetry tends to project the self out.
Right.
This is sort of rejecting that or causing some friction.
Right. And it's an easy entrance. It's really, no one's exactly resisting this either. Not far away, thank you, David, thank you. Not far away, we saw the port, the strange, old-fashioned, silent town. So now we're kind of looking out, and I think old-fashioned is a very interesting word for Longfellow to put in this poem, because there's even something more old-fashioned than writing a poem, and that the town that's surrounding this old farmhouse is old-fashioned from the point of view of the people in the farmhouse. So the strange, old-fashioned, silent town. I, 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 I mean, the rhymes and the syntax may be dated and may even have been dated in Longfellow's own time, but the language isn't dated. The language is interesting. The language is really doing what you want a poem to do. The language is really has its elements of surprise and freshness about it, that I think even for us who can look at this kind of poem as very dated in some way, can also be very very refreshed by it, because it's actually doing something. The language is actually doing something interesting, and that is keeping us alert. It's the language isn't putting us to sleep. I mean, the rhythm may be a little soporific, but then the language really keeps us awake, keeps us alert. the lighthouse, the dismantled fort. And then we really get the scene, the wooden houses, quaint and brown. I remember that line in Elizabeth Bishop's poem about the houses in Nova Scotia painted that awful shade of brown. Catherine? You're muted.
Yes, the line, actually, I was reminded of Elizabeth Bishop and that poem. The line in the previous line, the word dismantled, the yet to be dismantled, elms with hyphenated.
Yes. Yeah, right. Well, I'm sure, I'm sure.
You sure Longfellow read Bishop.
Yeah, but I'm sure Elizabeth Bishop knew Longfellow. I mean, she grew up on reading Longfellow. Yeah, dismantled. I actually hadn't thought of that before, but very much so. We sat and talked until the night, descending, filled the little room. And then that's not so dated. That's pretty straightforward. It's and the night filling the room. The little room. These people, however many people there are, they're kind of huddled together in this little area. Our faces faded from the sight. Our voices only broke the gloom. So this melancholy, there are these people, friends, sitting in the darkness, and the thing that keeps them connected are their voices. They hear each other. They're having this conversation, but it's getting dark. No one switches on the light. There isn't electricity yet. But the fire is outside. It's not in the room. Our voices only broke the gloom. We spake. Please, Bill?
I was wondering whether you've read only in, I think, the natural way, only our voices, but we could also see it as modifying broke. Our voices only broke the gloom. They couldn't do more than break it. They couldn't eliminate it or entirely.
I was hoping you would make that point.
Oh, really? It's my kind of point, is it?
It is your kind of point, but I agree with you that that only is a little ambiguous about what it's modifying.
And yes, and it may even sort of retrospectively justify some of the previous trailing epithets, which give one pause, perhaps. But I was reading. This will take us away from where we want to go, so I'll be brief. But I was reading an English critic called Eric Griffiths on the line "I only have eyes for you," and he gives a delightful reading which brings out the virtue of the placement of "only," because we tend to think that it might mean I alone have eyes for you, or I don't have eyes for anyone else, or it could even mean I only have eyes for you, but I certainly don't have ears or anything else, or I alone have eyes for you and no one else does. But what he noted too was that its placement allows for the reading, the only reason why I have eyes is for the sake of seeing you. So ever since reading that by Griffiths, I've been intent on picking out cleverness about the placement of the adverb only.
Only, yeah. Oh, I love that. I also love that song.
Yes, yes, quite.
Lloyd, I
Yes.
think I just want to add to the
Oh, Jennifer.
mood you're creating around these voices in the dark room, because I think for me, the understated work the poem does, speaking for a plural we, and we're together in the room and we see the same thing. And then when it gets dark, we're joined by our speaking, and then speaking joins our memories, and the room is dark, but the next, I put this in the chat, I feel like the next place the poem goes is to talk about what fills the hearts of friends. I mean, each space is built by what we share in terms of where we are, but the mood in the room and what we see, and then a question, about the feelings.
Mm-hmm.
What's happening in our hearts is different. And the way the poem, it reminds me of the Yeats poem, we sat together and,
Yeah.
and then fell silent.
Right.
It creates a particular kind of intimacy that says we almost share everything and we don't entirely, and some of it we can speak about it and some of it we can't. And
Right.
and what brings us back together again in the later rooms is noise coming back or the driftwood firing up. But I think what seems again subtly most powerful to me is it's as if the camera is always pointing the same way, and we don't realize how the depth of field is changing to heighten a sense of looking in the same way or looking together or experiencing the same thing. And it's that internal adjustment of friendship and intimacy that the poem, with the present and with the past, and I
Right.
guess maybe with the future too, as it imagines this begins a larger division, that's all happening in the same space that we, in many ways we share, and then in some ways we can't. So
Yeah.
Along those same ends, or toward those same ends, the way it's phrased as the site, where it's just depersonalized and unified third person, it's no one's site. And it's not even just site simplex, it's just the sites.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. No, that's an odd, that's a very odd little moment in the poem. And that I'm glad you mentioned that, because it's also one of those places that we as modern readers kind of think, well, we wouldn't say it this way. But the more you think about it, the more it's actually doing something. It's not just a kind of automatic writing. We spake of many a vanished scene, and then this real, I think this really lovely stanza about, that's really kind of about conversation among friends. This is what we still talk about. We spake of many a vanished scene, of what we once had thought and said, of what had been, and yeah, Jennifer, and might have been. There's this sort of odd tense thing. Is that kind of future perfect? We talked of what might have been, of what had been, and what might have been, and who was changed, and who was dead. And it's really, it's very mournful, it seems to me. It's and very authentic, very very real about what we talk about with our friends. Especially the older the friend, the more true that is. Yes, more Elizabeth Bishop. Um, um, and all that fills the hearts of friends. And this is where I think the poem really turns towards something very poignant and very real. And all that fills the heart. And you think, I mean, it sounds like it's setting up something that, oh, everything that fills our hearts, our friendships, our families, you think it's setting up something kind of sentimental and positive, and then it really turns into something else. And all that fills the hearts of friends, when first they feel with secret pain, their lives thenceforth have separate ends and never can be one again. And suddenly the conversation and the awareness in that conversation is of something that something that takes place that is not what you expect from this poem. Catherine.
And I think the hint of the change starts earlier, because in the fourth line, it didn't say, and how we're changed and yet we're not dead. So the who could have been we, but I think it's, as you say, a third person. And then in the next stanza, it's a very short time from first to never. Very short time, and that's stunning because well, it's true.
Yeah, it is. And it is stunning. And then there's something really, I think really tragic that comes at the end of this stanza. Their lives thenceforth have separate ends and never can be one again. And here, that's a kind of devastating observation about what can happen even among friends. And this isn't just gossip about, people we don't like so much, but this is about intimacy. It's about people we care about. And then this amazing, I
Before
think
you
this
go on,
amazing, yeah, Bill.
just before you get to the next bit, are you taking those lines as being referential to the nature of the friendship between the two people present in the room? Because the poem begins with a cataphoric we, so we don't really know who it refers to. And these lines could be suggesting that those two individuals have started out with shared aims, but have diverged, so that now they're trying to bridge a gulf which separates them. Or is it a more general reflection on friendship among others?
Well, you actually, this is very interesting because you're taking it as two people.
Oh.
And I've always taken this as a group of people.
Ah, okay. Yes, I did automatically jump to that conclusion.
Yeah, but I mean, there's nothing to give evidence about how many people are there. I've just, I've just always assumed that it was a sort of group of friends.
No, I didn't even entertain your idea, but now you mention it, it may be right.
Well, I haven't entertained your idea, and you may be right. But I am eager to get to that next line. because I do think I think it's one of the great lines in poetry. The first slight swerving of the heart, I find that devastating. That it's really about how somehow in very quiet, even minimal ways, things happen between people who are even friends, and that that there's nothing you can do about it, and that it's not a kind of major upheaval, but just some little thing that the first slight swerving of the heart, that words are powerless to express, and leave it still unsaid in part, or say it in too great excess. And what interesting and also and devastating alternatives there are. I mean, even among friends. I mean, you can, we sometimes, friendships, even friendships sometimes end. There's something happens, but here, what happens seems almost inevitable, and not some sort of major upheaval, but even the little things that happen, or not getting the words quite right, leave it still that we're either something we don't say that hurts, or we say something in too great excess, that we overstate something, maybe not intentionally even, but that how easy it is that even friends can hurt one another.
It's too great excess a flaw. I feel I do like the stanza, but is it vitiated by the tautology in that last phrase? Excess is already necessarily too great, so too great feels OTOs.
Yeah,
and being pernickety.
Yeah, I have to say it doesn't bother me that that somehow that feels that it does feel genuine, but in this context, it feels genuine to me. That
isn't that showing the thing it's saying?
Well, yeah,
Great.
yeah, right. No, exactly. I think that's what Bill means.
Yeah.
And that, but that you're right, that it is being, it's being excessive. It's demonstrating excess. Yeah.
In that the first line of this stanza, which it turns a knife in the heart. The first slight swerving, they're linked by sound.
Alliteration.
Yes, thank you. I'm too embarrassed to lose that word.
No, don't. Please.
Alliteration. But also it distills that contradiction that you've been talking about. Swerve. I don't know what swerved in the 19th century, but in our century, what swerves is a car, and it's to avoid danger. There's not a slight swerve. A swerve by its nature is isn't it a sudden thing to avoid danger? It's not, when we swerve, we go off the road rather than the slight swerve just seems to me to, by the self-contradiction, to be, again, that's what this stanza is about, how the magnitude of that very first omission or,
Can I ask a question?
Yeah, Stephen.
So are you, I think I maybe misread or read differently that stanza. Are you thinking the thing between the individuals is some sort of betrayal that separates them? I thought the failure to say something or say it too much was about their realization about mortality, not as if the realization of life and death is what's going to separate them, not as if they did something between them. Or did I miss something that made you feel they had, there was a sinning going on between the friendship?
Well, I wouldn't say sinning, and I wouldn't say betrayal, although I wouldn't rule that out. But just that it is human nature that our feelings change, and that, David.
Oh, I was gonna. There is a shadow of fault or moral inadequacy here. That the slight swerving could be the heart swerving into slightness, into inadequacy, and slight, of course, is also like calling out to, like, a slight is an insult. This could be discomfort in the conversation, even before the too great excess.
Yeah, I think that's possible, but my impulse here is to take this as something really very small, and that even something so small can be a kind of the beginning of some kind of rift, of some sort of something that could turn into a major upheaval. But that even something so delicate, something so small, some little some just little change of feeling, it's a matter of, Catherine, I would say, with your car analogy, that maybe the key thing is just a kind of change of direction. That something is, I mean, you think of friendship or love as this kind of as a very direct connection between or among people, and that the swerve is something the swerve turns it into something indirect, some little thing that makes you turn in a slightly different direction, and how devastating that is, and how inevitable that is.
There's a feeling of a difference, a difference between the people, which at first they're not able to articulate. So the words are powerless to express it. Could be a difference in feeling. It could be a difference in conviction. Could be a sudden recognition that somebody's actually a Trump supporter.
That's right.
And
No, I mean,
at first you can't.
Oh, Wendell.
Yeah,
Wendell.
And
Lloyd, this discussion brings to mind that wonderful poem of yours.
Oh,
it's
maybe that's why I like this one so much. Yeah, the end of a friendship.
Yes, that one.
Yeah. Well, we become friends we become friends with people, we become intimates because we agree, or at least one of the things that makes us friends. We fall in love with people, we love our friends, mainly because, or in an important way, because we agree about things. And then, but we're not the same people. And that there's always this possibility that, well, what happens? I mean, I go to a museum with a friend, and the friend says, you know, we look at a painting that I love, and the friend says, well, I don't know, I'm not sure about this. And it, it, it's maybe devastating is you know, too big a word, but that there is some slight swerving that can be very distressing. That can. Oh, Susan? No? Okay.
Yeah. Could this, when I first read it, I had the feeling that it was also talking about the inability of us to face death, and who was changed and who was dead, and all that fills the hearts of friends when they first feel secret friends that never can be won again. And so it worked both ways. It wasn't only the swerving and loss of friendship, but it felt like it had to do with the inability to express to another one that the ends will come at different times, and that we can never be one again. And that was part of what made me go back to those lines, was whether it was talking about death in the literal sense that was not allowing us to express ourselves, or whether in fact it was death friendships and all of that. I just want to put that out.
Yeah. Well, I think that's, you know, that underlies everything in the poem. I mean, looking at that shipwreck, looking at the remains of that shipwreck, that death is underlying everything. But that even in a kind of small way, there's a there's a wonderful Stephen Sondheim song from A Little Night Music, Every Day a Little Death, one of Sondheim's cheerier numbers. But these Jim, yeah.
Yeah, I agree with the parts about death, and I think obviously the poem is a great deal about that, and it moves towards the end with the fire and the driftwood and the parts of the ships that have decayed or been thrown up on the shore. But I think that in the slight swerving of the heart, where the shift is taking, it's a more subtle, it's a more subtle acknowledgement of how people's psychology work, that it's as you say, like in the museum, it's a slight loss. It's not a major loss that then will go on to a more difficult end. But I think it does describe the way people, it's a slight move away that slowly changes something that can lead to something. I think it's part of the poem that I think is very powerful.
Yeah, it's not a rift, it's a swerving, it's not a rift.
It's a
Not
slight,
yet.
a slight
Slight
swerve.
swerving, right? But not a huge rift.
Right.
Not yet. The very tones in which we spake had something strange I could but mark. The
Lloyd?
leaves of memory seem to make a mournful rustling in the dark. I think that's quite eloquent. I think that's quite beautiful. Off, yeah.
Brian wanted to chime in there, and I wanted to let him ask a quick question before you read on. Is that all right?
Please, yeah.
Brian, Donna?
Yeah, David's brother. Thanks for having me.
Thank
Actually,
you.
this is the perfect time, this stanza, because I think what he does that's very honest in the writing is he acknowledges the ways in which the swerves is perceived and expressed by people. And then what's also very honest to human experience is I don't even know if the writer is aware that it's happening to the people in that room right then. They're talking probably of other people and what they've seen of other people. And and only at this time does it begin to shift. And they're slowly, they might realize that, yes, it is happening to them. And at first they could only touch that through other people.
Right.
I just think it's very true to the process. And I really appreciated that.
Yeah. No, thank you. I think that's, I totally agree. Ted, you had a question about I could but mark, and can you say what your question is, because I probably agree with you.
I can really only express a very bodily sensation. I feel like I've become a knot, K-N-O-T, with these 4 words. I feel tied up, and I need somebody to untie me.
It's not my favorite moment in the poem.
I think it's interesting, though, along Brian's point, that the poem is about becoming aware. So much of it is about the poignance of becoming aware of what's been going on. I could but mark. In a way, that's all I could do, is be aware at this point, because there's no helping the loss or changing it.
Right, but you're aware of it.
That's all you are. I could but mark.
Right.
Aren't there also 2 possible meanings? I had no option but to remark it. It forced itself on my attention, but I could also, I could do no more than mark it. I couldn't express it, reaching back to the inexpressibility motif in the previous stanza.
Yes. Yeah. No, exactly. It's just, I mean, again, I think the phrase is a little, it's forced because of the rhyme.
And also the aphoresis, the clipping of remark, that's faintly dainted as well. It's a bit like Blake, I mark in every face I meet marks of weakness, marks of woe. So he's kind of forced the language to fit the meter. So we suspect him of bad faith, as it were. But I think it can be redeemed by noticing that possible double meaning.
No, I think that's true. I think the line isn't unredeemable. It's just not my favorite moment in the poem. The phrasing seems just a little forced there, in a way that the first slight swerving of the heart doesn't seem forced. It seems inevitable.
Lloyd, I think it's the first place, maybe it's the only place the I breaks in
Oh,
to the poem, and
oh,
not
yeah,
to take away from the rest of what you said, but I think it's kind of noticeable that that's how, that's something he can't help noticing and can't do
right.
anything more
Oh,
than
yeah,
notice.
that,
And
no, I
so,
hadn't noticed that. And that is, yeah, thank you.
And that fits beautifully with the idea that this is the moment in the poem when he's thinking about a divergence between the two people, if it is two gathered
Right.
under the we.
Right.
So now the I separates himself as if to mark the fact that they are no longer unified by purpose or intent or shared feeling.
Yes. Yes. Oft died the words upon our lips, as suddenly from out the fire built of the wreck of stranded ships, the flames would leap and then expire. And then here he's being very explicit about the analogy between the shipwreck and the fire and the fire within, the inability, the failure to articulate what the people in that room want to say. And as their splendor flashed and failed, splendor is very striking, but it also fails. We thought of wrecks upon the main, of ships dismasted that were hailed and sent no answer back again. Yeah, well, this is, I mean, certainly the sense of death, of calamity, of inevitable loss here is very explicit and 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 moving and simple. I think, and sent no answer back again is really is very eloquent. It's very simple. It seems really unforced and very kind of natural observation. And then, I think this is very good writing. The windows rattling in their frames, the ocean roaring up the beach. It's roaring. I like up the beach. That's sort of kind of, don't look up. It's heading for you. The windows rattling in their frames, the ocean roaring up the beach, the gusty blast, the bickering flames, all mingled vaguely in our speech. I think there's some real observation here that the writing seems very genuine to me, seems very unforced. And I mean, yeah, it's the language of the period, but that it doesn't seem cliched or stiff or as I say, forced in any way. All mingled vaguely in our speech until they made themselves a part of fancies floating through the brain, the long lost ventures of the heart. Ventures, I think, is wonderful, that send no answers back again. And I think at this point in the poem, it's really heartbreaking, and that it is brokenhearted. And brokenhearted, I'm sorry Cami still isn't here, because it's sort of brokenhearted. The sense of loss in the same way that Tennyson's In Memoriam is this inevitability of loss. Bill, do you want to elaborate a little bit on vaguely?
Well, everything before is so powerful and real and out there. And then suddenly it turned, with a word like vaguely, it turns to mist. It's softened, and there's a kind of pivot on that word.
Yeah, that it's kind of it's indefinable. It's a little out of reach. It's misty. It's just it's hard to get a hold of.
And all the other words in that stanza are punches.
Right. Yes. Yeah. Yeah.
Doesn't that start with mournful rustling a few stanzas back?
Yeah, sure. Yes, right. Right.
But our speech somehow doesn't catch the intensity.
Right. Right. Right.
There's the wonderful moment where the line is repeated and sent no answer back again, from the ship to the heart. And
exactly.
It makes the metaphor absolutely the central focus of the experience.
Right. I mean, it's really the rhyme is the same. It's almost exactly the same line that's repeated for the shipwreck as it is for the the personal wreck inside the house. Yeah, I think that's wonderful that repetition is really a very key poetic moment in the poem. That Longfellow actually knows what a line can do and what repeating a line can do. It's also isn't it the same rhyme?
Not quite. Again, main, again, brain.
Again, brain, but where's the no? But the first slight swerving of the heart rhymes with and leave it still unsaid in part. So it's the heart part rhyme that gets repeated. And that also seems to me very powerful and very skillful and kind of subtle, because we don't really notice it, and yet it's the only place in the poem where that happens, like the eye. The long lost ventures until they made themselves a part of fancies floating through the brain, the long lost ventures of the heart, the long lost ventures of the heart that send no answers back again. So the shipwreck and the ventures of the heart, refusing to answer, in unable to answer. Oh, flames that glowed, oh, hearts that yearned. Again, it's a very old-fashioned kind of expletive exclamation, and yet that by the end of the poem, I think to me it feels earned. That it's not just poetic writing, that it's really a kind of expression of pain and loss and future loss. Oh, flames that glowed, oh, hearts that yearned, they were indeed too much akin. the driftwood fire without that burned, the thoughts that burned and glowed within. Well, he's being very explicit. He is giving us the moral. But to me, it seems genuine. To me, it seems earned that the poem has led up to this observation. You know, would the poem be better if it ended until they made themselves a part of fancies floating through the brain, the long lost ventures of the heart that send no answers back again?
I would think that's a better ending.
I would too.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, and maybe I
cut the last stanza.
Yeah, definitely. I'm with you.
I like the last stanza, but I think it is the sign of the time, and of that kind of, well, we have to end with the moral, and there are worse forms of this. I mean, I think this is eloquent. Catherine?
In a much lower brow kind of poetry that ends, and so it goes, and so it goes. That seems to me essentially what this stanza says. And
Yes.
on the one hand, it's too much. On the other hand, and so it goes, and so it goes.
Yeah. Well, it feels very real. It feels like that he has to make that connection. I think a contemporary poet, a 20th century poet or 21st century poet might think twice about adding that moral. And
you don't want to disappoint your audience because they won't buy your next book.
Oh, they won't anyway. Oh no, Longfellow didn't have that problem. Yehudi?
Yeah, I think this it has nothing to do with anything except Longfellow really giving this as his own cri de coeur, his own direct feeling after constructing a wonderful poem. And this is heartfelt and absolutely direct. And perhaps the blatancy of that is what gives you pause, but I think it's very convincing.
Yeah, I agree with you. I believe it. I think it's genuine.
I have no doubt. And the O is significant in this case. It really is. Yeah. It's the Monteverdi I, and in exclamations of his when there's a heartfelt love affair that's broken and so on and so forth. But it's so direct and so non-evasive, non-elusive, non-referential. It just is so, it's a direct statement of pain.
Yeah. I completely agree with you. I mean, we really, we in a way, it's kind of, it's sad that we can't get away with that anymore. In some way. But Catherine?
To me, I vote with Jim to end it with send no answers back again, which sends no answers back again. Whereas this final stanza is stepping back and reflecting on poetry. Here's what I was doing. I was comparing that fire without the thoughts but that burn. So to me, it kind of broke the spell.
Huh.
Which
Yeah,
was such a powerful.
I understand that.
Yeah, no, I understand what you're saying.
And I, for me, I agree with Yehudi that that I mean this could have been awful. This moralizing at the end. It could have, the plot summary, oh, just the elbow in the elbow in the ribs. Get it? I'm comparing the driftwood fire to to inner feelings. And yet, I mean, I think it could have been it could have been worse. Oh yes, Daniel. Thank you. Can you say that for everyone?
Sure. I was just tracking some of the ways that the last stanza comes full circle for the poem from "We sat within the farm household."
Yes.
The thoughts that burned and glowed within, from like having the environmental image of dilapidation and wear and disrepair to an inner landscape with some of those properties,
right. And
bringing that verbally.
Right. And not just within the cottage, but within ourselves.
Mm-hmm.
And that within is really, it's an important word, because you're right, it goes back to the very first line of the poem. And I think that, as I say, I think it's genuine. I don't feel that it's tacked on, but I think in a way to end the poem that sends no answers back again, I think that would be more devastating as an ending. And I think maybe Longfellow just had to tie it together. And he does that beautifully and with a lot of feeling and genuinely. I don't for me, the ending is not a letdown or a disaster at all. But Stephen, yeah.
I was just going to say, I agree that I don't think it's a disaster. I don't think the poem was ruined by it. But and I have to say that I've grown in my appreciation of the poem because of everybody's comments.
Oh, good. Good. I was hoping you would.
But can I just say one thing, though? The
Yes.
thing that always bothers me, I think, about Longfellow is clear in that last stanza. Because we heard the Tennyson before, I felt like what Tennyson is doing the internal work of coping with death and loss, doing it well, and then saying, now I'm going to let you look at what I did. Whereas I feel like Longfellow is doing the work, and he does it beautifully at some times, but it's stagey. He's aware he's on a stage. And when he ends the poem by stepping on the stage into the spotlight again, because he knows he's going to perform this for the audience, to me, he took away from me the thing I needed. So I would get it from the poet doing the work and letting me share it in Tennyson. The rug got pulled out from under me when he demanded the spotlight at the end of the poem.
You are absolutely entitled to your. I won't argue with that, but I know that for me, I'm satisfied with the ending. I even like it. I'm moved by it. And if a student wrote this poem, I would say, maybe cut the last stanza.
Hey, why don't you two poet laureates go outside and settle this like men?
Can I just
Jennifer.
add, this is, I'm not, I'd just like to make an observation about the musical work that the last stanza does, because I do feel a difficulty in entering 19th century music is that it all starts to seem like the same thing, and it's harder to feel the impact of nuances or orchestrations within it. But I'm setting aside the questions and the issues or defending the stanza on other terms. I want to just notice, this is following up on Daniel's wonderful point that within is the last word of the last stanza and practically the first word of the poem. And so we don't hear it as an echo, but it could hold the poem that way. I think what we notice, there's a kind of nesting boxes effect for me in the last stanza, as if the rooms that were telescoping as different things moved in and out of that space, from within a room to within a heart, that now there's a sonic effect of kind of nesting, so that the flames that glowed and glowed within the first line and the fourth line of the last stanza get held by that glowed, and they match the crossing effect of the fire without that burned, the thoughts that burned and glowed within, the chiasmus of that, where we feel, and again, I kind of like that without, although here it means outside.
Outside, right.
Is also calling up for us the emotional feeling of without throughout the rest of the poem. So I just feel like glowed and glowed hold without within, it's a musical parallel and conclusion to this feeling of what's inside this space and what's inside intimacy and what differences or reversals are possible within it. And I think that's a kind of a subtle musical effect we hear, that like the echoes of part and heart, which I don't think we register consciously, oh, I heard those before, but I think they do help bring the poem to a close. We don't remember that within was at the beginning, but we do hear burned and burned, without within, and maybe glowed and glowed. And so again, I appreciate the musical gesture of this last line that leaves us, and for me, if I were to shade it, I would say for me, Wordsworth is speaking from a we of available song, whereas Tennyson is writing about personal experience, and that the proportions are different. I'm not bothered by that move at the end, because I think it's one of the most song-like of the stanzas, and it's turning it back to a more communal property of song. But
it's beautiful. I think we really need to let Marita go, but David, you wrote something very eloquent that just went by, and I think we should end with your comment of on the chat just a minute ago.
Yeah, I was building on something that Mike said, which is that the things that are too much akin could include the respective hearts. And with the withinness and the nesting, it could be that, like, these are hearts that are the people could be sort of trapped inside their own hearts, and that their introversion, maybe even shading toward narcissism, like, could be the sort of fatal flaw. That they're stuck in this poem, and unable thereby to reach out and repair their friendships.
Well, that's a very sad and poignant note to end on, but thank you so much. I think that's a very powerful look at the end of the poem and at the whole poem. And thank you so much for this riveting discussion. I enjoyed it more than I thought I was going to have to fight for this poem more than I had to. So thank you all so much. And Marita, thank you so much for hosting us yet again. And sorry to keep you so long.
This was beautiful. Thank you. I really appreciate this conversation. So thank you all for being here too. And it was great that it ended the way it did. I loved how it went. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you, Lloyd.
Everybody.
Great choice,
Thank you,
Lloyd.
everybody.
Great choice.
Thank you.
Thank you, Marita.